Happy Monday, folks. Welcome back to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, and I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. You guys can follow us both at our handles below. We have a lot to get through today. We have a pretty big show as far as what we want to talk about. We're going to talk about the protests that are going on across America, which I think you'll see will drastically get worse soon if things continue, and oil, WTI at a 21-year low. And of course, because New Hampshire was so close on Friday, it lost by one vote. We're going to run through a voter analysis in New Hampshire today, which I think you guys are going to find very interesting. Crucial battleground state, but we'll get into that more. Right now, though, Tim, a big story in the markets. We do have it looks like we have some help for small businesses on the way. They're close to a deal. But right now, as we've spoken about a million times, until demand for oil comes back, we're going to see some problems out there in the market. Why don't you tell us what's going on in the marketplace? And we'll get right into that and go from there. What's happening out there today?
Well, a lot of it is technical, but oil is trading at basically a 21-year low. It started the day very, very early, down 20%. It had closed on Friday at about $18. It was trading at $15 at about 4:30 this morning. It's now trading somewhere around $12.5. But the market is not having nearly as a severe reaction to that as it normally might. The Dow and the S&P are down about 1%. And the reason for that is because this is basically oil for the spot price. The May contract is expiring tomorrow, which means that by the end of the day today, June will be the front month contract for oil. So this is basically oil for spot delivery trading at around $12, a little bit less. You could see it anywhere bouncing around pretty violently. I would say between $11.5 and $13 this morning. And basically storage is the issue because there are just very, very few places to store oil right now because all of the storage facilities are right up to the brim. So this is oil for the spot price. If you look out to June delivery, it's trading $22, $23, July $25, $26, August $28, $29. So oil right now actually now below $11. They've got it at $10.90. This is the spot price for oil. There's nowhere to store it. There are even some oil markets on the black market, not really published or traded electronically on any organized oil futures markets. But if you're in Canada, they will almost pay you to take away oil right now. They are landlocked. They can't put it on a boat and have it float down the Mississippi River. They don't have the storage capacity that we do. And of course, they never really wanted to complete the pipeline.
And I got to
there are places in Canada where oil is trading in negative numbers.
I got to point this out, Tim, because we've been saying this all for weeks now, and today is a perfect day that proves our point. So Tim and I have told you guys that a lot of this is just baked into the cake. When we saw some rallies over the last few weeks, especially during that stimulus bill, we heard the media make a lot of hay about, well, it's because we're getting money to small businesses, and of course that had some to do with it. But for the most part, reopening the economy, news on reopening the economy has driven this, have driven those rallies. When Trump has come out, Tim, and made it clear that he wanted the economy to reopen and that he was going to do what he could to get it out there. Today, we have news that the White House and the Congress are close on a deal. So if it was true that stimulus money was driving those rallies, then we would see that rally today, right? Would you agree with that? So we already know that
it's probably helping the market hold up a little bit. We've obviously had a very strong rally the last 2 weeks. Right now, the Dow's down maybe a little over 1.5%. The S&P's down 1.25%.
No shocker, really.
And after the move we had last week, I mean, the Dow was up 3% on Friday. S&P was up 2.6 over 2.6%. Bigger moves on the week, clearly. But this is, a lot of it's in response to a reaction in oil. But if oil was down this much for future delivery, the markets would be down much more.
Right. And in the end, if Andrew Cuomo was to come out at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock and say, you know what, the numbers look better, we're going to start to reopen. And we would see a drastic turnaround. I mean, because it's really about, well, when is there going to be demand again? So we're creeping up on the month of May. That is the oil demand season. We're coming up on it, the summer. And throughout
summer driving season.
It's the summer driving season, and then running up. That's right, until Labor Day. And if one of these larger states, and where this is a perfect segue into where we're going, Tim. We're seeing these protests yesterday break out everywhere. I know the markets, with oil, they would love to see some of this open up again because they just simply need demand. And it's not there right now. When we talked about retail sales last week, remember, gasoline stores were hammered over 20%. I mean, with that kind of demand, it's just, there's only so much you can do, right? I mean, there's only so much trading on the news that we can see here.
And those numbers were for March.
I know, right? We're not even in the April. I don't know if we didn't make that clear last
there's
week.
Probably 6 or 8 states where oil is trading easily below $1.20, maybe even below $1 in a few select locations. Typically, the price of gasoline on the futures market peaks within early to mid-June. Just at the beginning of the summer, when the driving and vacation plans are at their peak. Not that those vacation plans are being taken in early June as much as they are in August, but that's just when typically oil prices or at least gasoline prices peak.
Yeah. I was actually, everybody's got to be feeling it by now at this point. How long your car lasts, right? So right. How much money you're spending on gas a week, or maybe not even a week at this point. I got a big tank in my Jeep, so it fill it up, and it's usually I'll get in the car like on Saturday, then because my wife will go shopping or something. No offense, ladies, but at least in my experience, I'm always the one who's got to fill it up. And I got in the car this weekend, Tim, and it was still like a half a tank,
Right.
It's just the way it is. So you got to be feeling it now. And I was also just speaking with somebody who had a vacation planned, and they would go if they could, but they really can't. So they're hoping, because I think it's like 3 weeks from now. So they're like, what do you think? Is it going to be? We'll see. It depends on where you're going, which I know where they're going. I don't want to blow it up, but I would doubt that it's going to be time for that in 3 weeks. I mean, I hope so. I hope so. And apparently, let's just get into this. And apparently, millions of other Americans are hoping so as well. So yesterday and over the weekend, and now there are a lot of protests in probably a dozen states planned today. Some of them are going to be much bigger, but I actually, before we got on the show, I jotted down a list here. So we saw them so far in this red and blue states, Tim: Michigan, right, Ohio, Kentucky, Minnesota, North Carolina, Utah, Colorado, Washington. It's just there, and Virginia. And I mean, we've just been, I know I'm missing somebody somewhere. In Florida, we haven't seen big protests yet because our governor is trying to do what he can do. And he's giving a lot of control to, like the plan said, he's giving a lot of control to localities. So if the local mayor and the city council think they can open up some areas, Tim, they're doing so.
Right.
And over the weekend, Jacksonville beaches were opened.
Yep.
Okay. And there was an utter panic and breakdown on Twitter and on TV. And there's, the media, to include Fox News, by the way, were showing pictures. I know a dozen people who live in Jacksonville, and they're showing pictures that were from people, from people who live there, telling me these doesn't look like what's going on at the beach right now. Right there, I'm looking out my window, but they made it out like it was something it wasn't. And I just wanted to bring this up because while we all understood the idea of social distancing, which was never to save lives, which I'll repeat again, it wasn't to stop the spread. That changed midway through. It was to slow the spread, to prevent an overburdening of our healthcare system. We didn't want to overwhelm them. We just wanted to whelm them. That was the idea. It was never really intended to save lives. And the goalpost now is changing like crazy. And I wanted to bring this up because we never really had good evidence for some of these decisions, Tim. And while you and I, we debated schools, I think we both could agree that, things like a baseball game or something, maybe now in some areas we're getting to a point with certain protocols, maybe we can do that again. But those kinds of decisions were understandable, at least in the beginning, right? The idea that there was never any data or never any studies done on the transmission of viruses and even very similar viruses to COVID-19 that showed outdoor transmissions were not high risk. It's only because the media had muted those voices. And now we're at a point where some people want to reopen the beaches and we're seeing this very heavy pushback. And I just want to remind people why I was like, you never make rash decisions with either inaccurate or incomplete or a lack of information. You just don't do it, because now we're getting this information. I want to pop this up on the screen, Tim. I want to talk about this study for a little bit. It's out of China. It's of China. And I know we can't believe the data, but these are people who track transmissions and indoor versus outdoor. And they had categorized them. So home spread, indoor home residences, New York City, we've spoken about this before, with an underground, no sunlight, close proximity, mass transit, seems to be, at least supported by this study, seems to be, one of those high transmission areas and categories. So let me pop this up. I'm just going to read the abstract because I could get into what I wrote about it, but I'm just going to take it right from the horse's mouth. Okay. And we'll put this study today in with, the list of resources for the show all the time. And this came out of MedRxiv. A lot of people are going there to grab studies to look into this. They've put a wealth of information out. Again, before this happened, there was a lot of evidence to show that indoor transmissions, locking in the vulnerable with people who were potential carriers, was not a good idea. So let's look and see what they came up with. Bang. Here's the abstract. So the background, I'm going to read this verbatim, just so nobody thinks I'm twisting anything out of play here. And I've made it big, folks. It's covering Tim and I, but I made it big so you guys can read it yourselves. By early April 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic had infected nearly 1 million people and had spread to nearly all countries worldwide. It is essential to understand where and how SARS-CoV-2 is transmitted, and that's what causes COVID-19. Methods. Case reports were extracted from the local municipal health commissions of 320 prefectural cities, municipalities, with their version of municipalities in China, not including Hubei, between January 4th and February 11th, 2020. We identified all outbreaks involving 3 or more cases and reviewed the major characteristics of the enclosed spaces in which the outbreaks were reported and associated indoor environmental issues. Here are the results, folks. 318 outbreaks with 3 or more cases were identified, involving 1,245 confirmed cases in 120 prefectural cities. We divided the venues in which the outbreaks occurred into 6 categories: homes, transport, food, entertainment, shopping, and miscellaneous. Among the identified outbreaks, just under 54%, 53.8%, involved 3 cases, 26.4% involved 4 cases, and only 1.6% involved 10 or more cases. There is overlap here, by the way. So just because somebody got it on the train on the way to the park kind of thing, there's overlap. Home outbreaks were the dominant category. 254 of 318 outbreaks, almost 80%, just a tenth of a percentage point. Followed by transport, 108, which is 34%. And here's where they say this actually. Note that many outbreaks involved more than one venue category. Most home outbreaks involved 3 to 5 cases. We identified, are you ready? We identified only a single outbreak in an outdoor environment, which involved 2 cases. Conclusions, and it's cut off there a little bit, so I will read that from the actual study. Conclusions, all identified outbreaks of 3 or more cases occurred in an indoor environment, which confirms that sharing indoor space is a major SARS-CoV-2 infection risk. All right, Tim, let's get rid of that so people can see us. Where I'm going with this, obviously, as you may know, if you watched the news over the weekend, if you watched Twitter and social media, and it's just that you can't really blame, some people for being scared or nervous that maybe, they can't go to the beach. But the fact of the matter is, while this is a smaller sample, of course, it's still, 600 something cases, 1,200 and something cases, not small, but it is consistent with the other studies we have seen with SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, those outbreaks. There's some data out of Singapore and Hong Kong, as well as China. And this is consistent with that, which shows that, a beach, for instance, and they're still practicing. If you went to Jacksonville or, they're still practicing it out there. There are penalties for it. The only arrest that happened on Jacksonville Beach over the weekend was a completely unrelated arrest. They identified somebody, Tim, who had like a warrant out of state, or I think it was an out of state.
Right, I saw that.
Yeah. So he was arrested, but that is not, that had nothing to do with people not practicing social distancing. And as anybody who's ever been to a beach, it's not like you're all right up on top of strangers. Sometimes I guess beaches can be crowded, but it's going to take time for that fear to come out of like the mass consciousness, nationwide. It's going to take some time, which is why I've been advocating for some of the stuff to get started sooner rather than later, Tim. What are your thoughts on that study and why?
I think that it's very well documented that a lot of kids came back from spring break, primarily from South Florida, and got COVID. Now, you don't know if they got that on the beach, on South Beach or at Fort Lauderdale Beach. They could have got it inside in the hotel room.
That's right.
But there was no doubt that there were documented, hundreds of cases, hundreds of situations where either them or then eventually family members or other people who they saw after they left spring break and went back to wherever they had traveled there from, that was a big incubator.
Yeah,
a period of
but
time.
We didn't have the overburden.
But clearly going outside and getting fresh air is always a good idea. There's no doubt about that. You're not going to catch. I don't think anybody has ever said you're going to catch this from like walking down the street.
Yeah, and just so there was a study out, by the way, that showed that this thing can live in the heat. We have spoken to 3 physicians. I speak to another one at 2:00 today who have said don't believe this study, that it's not it's out of France, I believe, and it studied it survived and multiplied for, and we're not talking about a long period of time. I think what I've read is that the heat is not as predominantly a killer of this disease as other COVID viruses and like the flu.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, that's
right.
very possible.
So it's not going to do as well. The heat is going to have a negative effect on it, but it's not going to completely eliminate it.
And I just also too want to point out that we didn't have anywhere near, even again, with the social distancing guidelines, the projections for Florida are not even close. They weren't. So even with those, and like you said, though, it's important to keep in mind, Tim, we don't know if those kids got it on the way, we just don't know. Mass transit, packed in a car. Where I am, there's a lot of travel to and from China, a lot. So, right. We just, and then because we did have problems here with our university kids coming back and having it. And,
Right.
so
Right.
it does at least suggest that, people they went with, whatever it may be. And by the way, I just want to point out again, just because at this point, anybody who watches or follows should take all of these models with a grain, because we've talked about this. But again, over the weekend, the IHME model was revised down about 8,000, and we're a little over 60, about 60,300 and something. What are we at? 308, 60,308. It jumped, Tim, after Trump came out and made that very next day, when Trump said we could be open sooner rather than later.
But I don't think it jumped because
day.
of that. I think it's being revised every day because of the data.
Yeah, I'm not, I'm just pointing out.
Frankly,
that it jumped the very next day.
I was surprised.
I wouldn't put it past any of these guys to do that.
I was surprised to see it revised down from 68 to 60, because we're now at 42,000 death count. I think we're easily going to get to 60.
That's a lagging indicator.
We're probably going to, I realize that, but we're probably going to end up being at least another 20,000. So we're probably, we're probably going to end up somewhere between 70 and 80.
I mean, if you look at where these deaths are coming from, they're coming from New York, and
right.
And they're the vast majority. I mean, not the majority, but they are a huge chunk of
right.
Our total numbers as a country.
Yes.
And death is a lagging indicator. And if you look at hospitalizations right now, I don't know.
They're on the decline.
Yeah, I mean, they're really down, Tim. They're really down. I don't know if we'll get there or not. I hope we don't, of course. But the point of the original point is just so many decisions were made without information, without information, with either inaccurate information or incomplete information. And this is what happens when you mute the voices of people. It's funny because like the modelers, and the non-practicing physicians have had so much to say here. They really have. And, somebody mentioned the protests. There were some small counter protests from healthcare providers, or just like nurses out there, whatever, saying, we understand you want to get back to work, but we're the ones dealing with this. I would say this to them: while we appreciate your work, there are other people matter too. Yes, they are at the front lines. And I agree with the president that these are modern day heroes, but they're not the only ones who matter. The guy who gets up every morning and, goes to work is a hero too. That's the idea of America. He's no less important than the healthcare workers, or she, for that matter. So, I just feel like this thing has been really lopsided. And those who, same thing we saw with the hydroxychloroquine, Tim, those who actually practice and use the drug to treat patients have been ridiculed, sidelined, stuffed in the backseat, whatever you want to call it. And they have not had an equal say in this. I mean, what's Dr. Smith in New York comes out and says, after he releases the results of his study, which he'll give to anybody, by the way, he'll give to anybody for scrutiny. You think CNN called him up and asked him for the results of his study to have some statistician who works for CNN look at it? I don't know if they did or not, but it certainly doesn't look like it. And if they did, they just buried what they found, and he comes out and says, I think this is the beginning of the end to this pandemic. And he's ridiculed. Look at what they did with Dr. Oz last week, which they're still doing. And Dr. Phil. Dr. Oz, unlike some of these people, have been actually talking to practitioners, people who are treating people with these drugs. And they have been waiting for a moment to attack him. Media Matters has been monitoring.
So what did they attack him for? I must have missed that.
So what he was trying to say is that, we have drugs out there for treatment drugs. And he was talking about the reopening of some areas of the economy. And then when he got to schools, he was talking about the risk to children, to school-age children, and the ability for this virus, like we talked about last week, to transmit. Actually, did we get to that? I'm not sure if we did or not. If not, that's a great time to bring that up. But the early testing for antibodies in Switzerland, among other countries, has shown that the viral load on children is just so low that they don't transmit to adults. Adults transmit to them. Now, of course, anything is possible, but the viral load is so low, he was suggesting, and the risk to children is so low that he was suggesting that it would be worth it. Like, sometimes you just have to make a trade-off, and it would be worth it. And what he, of course, meant was the flu, other things, the dreaded flu comparison. They take children too every year, but we don't close down the schools for it. Well, everybody, Dr. Oz said it's worth killing 2 to 3% of kids. And I mean, it was crazy, but they were waiting for something to jump on this man. And it's not because of what he really said. It's because Trump mentioned hydroxychloroquine. He took it upon himself. You know the work he's been doing. Fantastic work, honestly, talking to everybody in the field who's using it. And they were just waiting with, a loaded gun, waiting to jump. And he gave him something to jump on, And again, it's not that he really meant it like that. The same way Bill Bennett didn't mean it's not really a pandemic. But they take what people say, Tim, and they run with it, You got to be like so careful. You got to walk on eggshells.
I just think it's to the point where that satisfies the people, that their followers, and 90% of the world just ignores it.
Yeah, well, the problem though is that his world doesn't. He has built a reputation in not only his, the medical field, but in the world of media. Dr. Oz is beloved by the liberal media.
Right.
And because he's not in lockstep with them on this, they go berserk on him. So 90% of the world.
He's basically interested in the science, and, they're interested in a political agenda.
As we all should be, though, right? As we all should be.
Right.
So, I mean, really, some interesting comments from people. I guess I did mention it briefly last week. But I didn't load a graphic this morning, but I had some cool stuff on it because we did do a story, an article on it. And not just in Switzerland, the risk to children, but what's important about it, we knew, and we've spoken about the risk to children, but the whether or not they carry a high enough viral load. The Petri dish argument, Tim, the one you brought up, the one you advocated for, the Petri dish argument, that was always the second piece to the puzzle. So if they don't get, but I'll tell you what, Ron DeSantis, yesterday or Saturday, decided there's no more schools. We're going to continue distance learning down here. That's it. That's a wrap. There was a couple of things involved in that decision. And I just know this from family working in the school system. Feeding the kids was like near impossible, which we did speak about too. It just, when they go back, a lot of people, food service workers in school don't get the credit they deserve. When they go back on a fall semester, those people are there weeks ahead of time prepping the kids.
You're talking about if they had extended the school year.
That's right. If they would have went back.
I think what everybody needs to realize is that the school year in Florida ends much earlier than it does in the Northeast and in the Midwest.
Yeah, it does.
So, if the school year typically would end like May 10th, May 15th, I know my daughter went to school in Florida from junior high school on. So if the school year typically ends May 10th to May 15th, to talk about going back to school at this point in time, it's April 20th. You know what? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It's difficult.
Now, if the school year was scheduled to end June 10th, June 15th, June 20th, like some of the school systems in the Northeast or the Midwest, yeah, sure, you could have a realistic conversation about we can still have 6 weeks here, et cetera, et cetera.
And I
still think if you go back to when the decisions were made, the risk-reward trade was heavily in favor of closing the schools.
Yeah, I mean, that's just something we disagree on. I mean, other similar viruses, we saw the same thing. The kids just don't carry a higher viral load. It should have been a priority to get those, I mean, that's the fact of the matter is Birx and Fauci just were not focused on antibody testing at the time, Tim, to see what kind, they just weren't. And people could have tested children who were infected.
I don't think you could have enough material to do antibody testing until you had enough recovered COVID patients.
Right. But if they would have had the antibody testing out, we would have known. I don't know. I think we could walk and chew gum at the same time. I mean, I really do. I don't know. I mean, but it was the idea too, just to mention, of extending the school year was a lot more difficult and a lot more,
especially in Florida and in the South.
It would have been. It just wasn't. It wasn't a simple decision. Right. And while I'm disappointed because we robbed kids of their achievements. We robbed families of graduations. I mean, we have to do with this. We have to do better with this next time. We do, because every time China releases a pathogen on this country, which no doubt they'll do again if we don't punish them severely for what they have done, and they have destroyed the global economy if this continues. They have killed, regardless of the economic impact, which has its own deaths of despair. That's probably not even possible to calculate yet. Tim, they killed hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, they killed. If there's no political will to do something about China after this, there never will be political will. I mean, they are responsible for this, and we have.
Well, I think there will be, but you're not going to see it in the next 3 weeks.
We have a large number of people, though, in this country that, I mean, I didn't think this would be a party issue. And years ago, there was a wing in the Democratic Party that was not anti-China, just they were China skeptics, and they were hardline on things like trade. I'm old enough to remember that. I'm old enough to remember Chuck Schumer a few months ago wanting Donald Trump to be harder on China. Do you remember?
Absolutely.
During the trade negotiations? And now here he is, and it's just.
I think really that China will end up paying a massive price for this.
I hope you're right. I really do.
Not just here, but also in Europe and in the UK.
Yeah, I could definitely see Boris Johnson riding high right now, and thank God for his recovery. But I could definitely see him, even leading that kind of charge. I
don't think it's gotten a lot of press, but I think that the UK has already said that they are now going to do a U-turn on taking using equipment from Huawei for their 5G networks.
Yeah, and
that's a huge deal.
Yeah, it is.
That is a huge deal. That is more of an economic penalty to China than any amount of tariffs that you could possibly come up with.
I think, Tim, if there was an alliance of nations that did that,
I think you're going to see
it would be the worst thing we could possibly do to them. It probably is.
I think you're going to see that. Yeah. And I think you're going to see supply chains get moved from China, either back to this country or to other neighboring countries. It's probably going to be good for other countries in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, because they're going to benefit from it.
Right.
They're going to be the ones who everyone turns to.
Now you can't move them all to.
And they're worried about that.
You can't move them all to Vietnam in the next year just because they don't have the workforce to handle it.
There's other places.
That too. There's other places you can move them. I'm sure they are worried about
People's Daily, which I read as much as possible to be able to get their side of the story. They're worried it's going to go a lot of the. Maybe even pharmaceuticals will go to Japan. That's what it said about, 4 or 5 days ago in People's Daily. I was reading it. Every time something wrong happens in China and they're at fault, or their scapegoat is Japan, in case people don't know that. The Chinese and the Japanese have had a strained relationship for many years,
hundreds
predating the nation state. Right. Predating the liberal nation state order that we live in, in the international anarchy system, predating that. All right. So it's 10:34. Let's run through it. let's see what's going on again with the markets, and we'll move on. I got some oil questions when we get back from this. All right, Tim?
Sure.
But yep, it is 10:34, about to be, hold on one second, I can time this, 10:35. It is 10:35 on Monday, April 20th. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. You can follow me along on Twitter right there at Peoples_Pundit. And I'm joined by Tim the Source Anderson. You guys can follow him on Twitter at TJ Anderson1. If you're watching on Periscope, don't forget to give us those likes and those hearts, and follow the account that you're watching on Facebook Live. Same thing, like the page, People's Pundit Daily, and it will notify you when we go live. Give us whatever they do on Facebook, thumbs up, smiley faces. And then, guys, if you're on YouTube, we had a good run, and we would like to keep it going. If you watch on YouTube, then subscribe to our YouTube page. Also, we'll notify you when we go live, but we are trying to hit those milestones. So, and again, the ultimate way to support the show is to subscribe to PPD, which is ppdnews.us/subscribe. That's the short link, ppdnews.us/subscribe. Without subscriptions, we can't do any of this. You guys float this. It is reader funded now. Viewer funded data journalism. All right. So, Tim, what is going on out there in the markets? What has changed in the last, if anything, in the last half hour or so, 40 minutes?
Well, not a tremendous amount, but I just think the markets are having a real constructive day, given how much they were up last week and really over the last 2 weeks. This was the first 2-week stretch where the market averages were up back-to-back since the sell-off began. And this morning, the NASDAQ market is just slightly lower. It's getting a lot of support from the same stocks that have really powered it over the last 4 to 6 weeks. Netflix is up over 4%. They're going to report their earnings in a couple of days. It's trading at a new high. Amazon is up 2%. It's also trading at a new high above 2,400. The S&P 500 is down 1%. The Dow is down 1.5%. And again, oil is catching a tremendous amount of headlines today. It's down 40%. But that's very deceiving because it's really the spot month. It's really for oil that is for the contract for delivering oil tomorrow, because the May futures for oil expire tomorrow, and there is basically no storage space anywhere for oil. So oil's trading where oil is trading below right around $11. It's very deceiving because for June, oil is still trading 22, 23, pretty much where it was last week. And if we get more progress and more definitive signals that parts of the economy are starting to restart and some states are starting to loosen up their stay-at-home guidelines, I think you will see oil start to build a base just north of the $20 level and maybe make it into the, back to at least the mid to high 20s, maybe by the 1st of May.
I got a rudimentary or a basic 101 question, Tim, but can you explain to people the difference between WTI and what trades at CL and Brent crude? Which is, you always hear people say the benchmark, Brent crude. Can you explain to them the difference?
Right. So I can to some degree. I am not a oil expert. I'm not going to explain it from a geological standpoint. But WTI is West Texas Intermediate. It's basically the oil that comes out of the ground in the U.S. There are slight differences with the oil that comes out of North Dakota and the oil that comes out of deep water drilling. But with oil at these levels, I don't think there's too many deep water drilling operations that are really doing anything but just maintaining their rigs right now. And Brent crude is basically oil from the Middle East, primarily Saudi Arabia. Brent crude would typically in normal times trade at a slightly higher price, anywhere from a $2 to a $6 premium to West Texas.
Right. That was perfect. Keep it macro. That was perfect. Yeah. So speaking of maintaining, right? So we had heard this and we talked about this, you and I, but Fox did get a report out, an exclusive report. Speaking of maintaining, and oil producers, for people who have been watching, is an area of concern for me. So Fox is reporting that the Problem Solvers Caucus is what it's called. It's a bipartisan group of about 50 House members. They have a plan to refund this, to reopen the economy, and included, of course, is long-term stimulus. All right. I want to talk about a little bit about them getting close on this deal. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because we had on PPD, we had one, I think it was on Saturday, about the price from the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and then some of the other lender lobbies. It's important to remember, folks, that these folks are lobbyers, right, Tim? I mean,
Right.
So they are the voice of the National Federation of Independent Business is the largest small business lobby for the nation. They are the biggest voice for small business in this country. And they released their own plan last week, which we can get into a little bit, but they were telling media, anyone who would listen, that, the situation was dire and they needed to refund PPP. So what happened? The PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program. And what happened is Democrats blocked it. Republicans wanted to put another $250 billion into it, which, by the way, lender lobbies and the NFIB both say is too low a number, Tim. That's what
Right.
right. What else is a lobby going to say? But if you read their plan, it's actually pretty interesting. It's not like they came out with this number out of thin air.
Every number to a lobbyist is too low of a number.
Right. So it ran the PPP which Tim and I have spoken about, and we walked people through this at the time. It ran out of money just short of 2 weeks after they began taking applications. So it ran out that Thursday. They started taking applications on a Friday. It ran out the Thursday before the 2-week mark. Okay. And amazing feat for SBA. This isn't an administration, a government agency that doesn't deal with these kinds of numbers. And they did, it really is an amazing job. Like Obama's former head of the SBA, she said, we only do, talking about a couple tens of billions, Tim,
Right.
like
This was really spearheaded by the Treasury.
The
reality is, without the Treasury's infrastructure and all of their link ups with the banks, this would not have, been feasible.
That's absolutely went from Treasury to IRS from Treasury to SBA out to the lenders, and the lenders from there distributed it.
Right.
There was
now a lot of the blowback also that happened very early in this program was that the big banks weren't immediately jumping on board. But I think the size of the companies that were being targeted, ideally, the companies that you heard testimonials from on different media reports where, hey, we got our loan, we went to our bank, they had long-standing relationships with community banks and or local banks, not necessarily your big money center banks, JP Morgan, Wells Fargo, Bank America, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They were skeptical of it for a number of reasons, some of it dating back to the global financial crisis 12 years ago. But really, I think the ultimate user of this facility, the small business owner, the small business people that got the fastest results and were the happiest with it, were dealing with the small community banks. And even though maybe some of them might not have been staffed up enough to process all the loans that they had coming at them right away, they were much closer to the businesses that were the likely user of this loan than the big banks.
Yeah, there's data to back that up actually from the NFIB
Right.
that showed where this money well basically which firms by size found this a difficult process where their banks immediately, and we spoke about the problems that it had initially and they cleaned them up. I mean, Treasury said that Friday that they were going to fix some of the community bank issues and they were going to handle some of that, and they did. Come Monday, they did. And the NFIB released the study. I want to say it was the 10th, but something like that. But it was only a few days after this thing kicked off, Tim. And they, something like 71% found it to be easy, and went and were able to fill out the application and submit one. But it ran out quickly. There are, and we're going to get into this. There are some criticisms of this.
Yep, sure, of course.
But again, I think both what Tim and I, if I'm wrong, Tim, let me know. But I think what Tim and I are trying to say is, for a government program this large, this was administered very quickly. It's big government, folks. It never moved.
It was far better than most. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, really. I mean, it's government. I mean, if you believe government can do everything, then you may have bones to pick. But if you're realistic and you understand the inherent shortfalls of bureaucracy, then you can look at this a little bit more objectively and say, this was there's a lot of misinformation about this program too. But let's talk about why Democrats killed it first. And timing mattered. And let's just get into it. So it's about 250, a little bit, I think, give or take. Them McConnell tried to put back into this thing. Democrats blocked it in the Senate. There was Senate Democrats. Right. They did it through what's called unanimous consent. All right. And they wanted $150 billion for states, which was basically a state. You could call it a bailout because they didn't have the resources for testings and whatever. There was a lot in there. Here's another kicker, though. Another $100 billion for hospitals. It may come to pass that hospitals need another $100 billion. I don't think we're anywhere near that yet. It may come to pass. But at the time that Senate Democrats killed this, the money for the hospitals that was appropriated during the CARES Act, which is the coronavirus relief bill, more than $2.2 trillion, had not even really been used or allocated yet. They still had money. This was not a pressing situation. They hadn't even doled out the money from the CARES Act. What was out of money, Tim, was the PPP. That was the initial, was the immediate concern, and time was absolutely needed. Democrats also, time was absolutely a factor. Democrats also wanted, and this is a biggie, because I actually agree with this, but for now, this is why they were wrong here. They wanted another $60 billion for lenders that are in what we call CDFIs. They're community development financial institutions. All right. And the idea here was that we didn't, like Tim was just talking about, we don't want smaller small businesses. I'm talking about mom and pops, handful of employees not being able to get this money. So they wanted to earmark it. The Republican argument was time is more important. We can do that later, but time is more important. Obama's former head of the SBA agreed. I want to pull up her quote here because this is what she told roll call. Karen Mills. She ran the SBA under Obama's first term. She said, Congress has to act as soon as possible. And when they asked her to elaborate, she said, what I'm saying is, number one, get the money replenished. So she basically took McConnell's side, even though there are Republicans, and we know there are, that support this provision. The idea was the program was out of money, Tim. And that, it was the first and foremost, what they have to do is get the money out there. She actually had spoken with Nancy Pelosi's office too. She's from the left, and you would think by her joining with Republicans, and the NFIB also supports this provision in their plan. Let's see where I actually had this up here. In their plan, they were calling for some 400 billion. And I think around 200 billion of it, they wanted earmarked for companies with 20 or fewer employees. Yeah, there it is, 200 billion with 20 or fewer employees. But they understood the argument, just get it out there now. And these community development institutions, financial institutions, the CDFIs, again, they supported it too. Lender lobbies, they supported it too. But the idea was to get it out quicker. And what the NFIB said basically was that there really was no time to waste and that we're going to see repercussions from this because the Democrats held this up so much. And Small Business Administration, before I kick it to you, Tim, I just want to note the Small Business Administration, the data we have on the PPP, it shows, who got this money. No surprise, Texas was the biggest recipient. At that time, it was about 88,400 and change. That was how many loans came from Texas. And they got about just under $22 billion. California was second. All right. And they got 20.9. So very close. And it was about 55,000 loans. So it's almost like Nancy, it doesn't want to come back until the first week of May. Her state got a lot of money.
Right.
And she's just sitting back and kicking it. And if you haven't read this story, you should go to People's Pundit Daily and find it and read it. The title is Democrats Holding PPP Loans Hostage Put Small Businesses in Dire Straits. And if you haven't read it, you should read it because time was of the essence. And that's my argument here. Time was of the essence. And I think you should, you would know, Tim, from our private conversations. I absolutely understand what Democrats are talking about with that provision. Then I would absolutely support that provision. I told the Treasury Department that they should cap, and they did wind up capping, but that they should cap for businesses with 20 or fewer employees. It was basically something that, was a no-brainer. But at that time, is perfection, should we sacrifice, the time constraints, Tim, for perfection?
Rich, you're talking about the United States Congress.
Right. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, that they allowed this to happen.
Well, who allowed it to happen? I mean, the Democrats?
Yeah.
I mean clearly, look, in a perfect world, they would have loved to have had, look, they would have loved to have had the Republicans roll over and say, okay, well, look, you put anything in here you want. Just give us the $250 billion for small business. Now,
right.
If you would go back in history over the last 20, maybe even 30 years, the Republicans have conditioned the Democrats that anytime you whine or complain or threaten to have the media do a negative article on us, we'll give you anything you want.
Yep.
Okay. So it's the Republicans that have conditioned the Democrats to never do the right thing without asking for all of your favorite add-ins and giveaway programs.
The laundry list.
Your laundry list of far left, liberal, progressive giveaways that you also want attached to this. Now, they got very negative blowback when they tried to add the cut and paste New Green Deal to the original plan. And I think it was messaged to them pretty early after this. Okay, look, hospitals, we get it. You want to add $100 billion to a hospital for the hospitals for $250 billion to add on to the SBA. We'll make that trade.
Right.
Okay. But are we gonna let this program bail out states that have been hopelessly out of budget because they spent a ridiculous amount of their resources on foolish stuff, and now they're using this as an excuse for us to bail out all the problems that they had before anyone ever heard of the coronavirus? No.
And
I'm sure there's been conversation as a perfect example, and we've heard nothing about it, but I'm sure there have been conversations behind the scene that, look, we got to take away the $10,000 cap on combined mortgage and real estate tax deductions, 90% of which happen in Democratic blue states.
Yeah, the salt.
And I'm sure that a lot of I'm sure that suggestion has been put out there numerous times, and I'm sure it's been shot down numerous times.
Yeah. Yeah, they were, and I think it was either Rubio or Rick Scott. I'd have to go into my email and look, but it was actually, not your cookie cutter statement where it's like, hey, we're not going to support this, not enough time. It was pretty, it was a persuasive argument, which is that we would all love to put that 60 billion in there, Tim. But the fact of the matter is, the small business, it is more extensive than you would think to earmark something for an administration the size of the SBA. It was it would have been difficult. It would have held the whole program up, is my point. And well, not my point, their point.
Hey, Rich, I'll be right back.
Okay.
It was a bad echo right now, by the way.
Okay. And Tim's going to hop off here. But, the point that, and I think I'm leaning toward Rubio. Let me just double check so I don't attribute something to somebody that I shouldn't attribute something to. But yeah, it's Rubio. So basically, the idea is the SBA is just not that big, and it's not capable of processing this or administering that kind of money, slicing and dicing it like that quickly. And as somebody who would say that I'm more concerned about the mom and pop stores and the restaurants that or maybe a local pizzeria, they have 10, maybe 15 employees. Those are the people I'm worried about anyway. I'm not really worried about some of these bigger companies. And I am worried about, as far as bigger companies, oil producers, like Tim was talking about before. These guys, Tim and I argue, but Tim's not here right now. So I could just say it. They're going to hurt. They're going to hurt. And a lot of them aren't going to come back. That's not going to happen. They're going to be, some of them will just be pieced off, bought up by bigger producers, and they'll be pieced off. And, maybe I'll ask him for his thoughts on that when he returns and does his market update. But it's, and that's funny. Somebody said that it goes to the administrators and the CEOs of the hospitals. We'll see. I mean, the medical, if you guys remember the day we did Florida, it's, we were talking about Rick Scott and his problems when he ran for the first election. There's definitely, a potential for waste, fraud, and abuse. There is. And I think at least we should dish out that money to those hospitals before we go back and ask for anything else. I would love, in a perfect world, I would love to see some kind of clean appropriations for a certain, in times of, definitely in times of crisis. And in times of debt limit increases, that's something, conservative economists have been talking about for years. But it's not a perfect world. And the question now remains, because the bill didn't pass, the initial concern was that it wasn't going to get out in time. And now we have, anyway, time, because that time has passed because the program's out of money and they're just now coming to some kind of an agreement. So, that's really unfortunate. Tim, you want to say something more about that before we kick off the next hour?
No, I think that's pretty much covered it. I mean, I think the money for hospitals is not going to be a big lightning rod issue. I think a lot of it will probably go to overtime for current workers, and maybe even some bonuses for current workers, and maybe even a lot of salaries and benefits for a lot of hospital workers have actually been laid off during the last month if they have been in the areas that were not specifically assigned to treating coronavirus patients. You know, a lot of elective surgeries have basically all been put on hold, and for hospital, the reason that they never ran into a bed shortage in most hospitals was because any other types of activities that would typically use up hospital beds is not going on right now.
That's right.
And because of that, people assigned to those areas or who are in, surgical staff have been furloughed or laid off in a lot of those areas.
Yeah.
So I certainly don't think it's unreasonable to give some assistance there.
Yeah, that I don't see that being a hot button. Just spend it first is my point.
Right.
Now, the states, on the other hand, like you said, they're going.
That's a totally different issue because
and I'm not sure Americans are going to have an appetite for that, Tim.
Look, if the states have legitimate additional expenses associated with everything that's gone on for the last 6 weeks, that's fine. But I'm sure some states, if they could, would love to use this as a way to plug their deficit holes that, they have to some other way figure out how to deal with.
If it's directly related to the coronavirus.
Right. I don't think anybody's going to have an issue with that.
Yeah, that would be different. But, the federal government, 2/3 of you got the Senate in Republican control, barely, but you got it. You have the White House in Republican control, and the Supreme Court tilts conservative by 1 vote. I think that the right would be making an enormous mistake in the long term for their cause and for policy. It's just bad policy. It's bad policy to bail out irresponsible people.
Right.
And that goes for corporations, that goes for businesses. I'm not going to go on my tangent again, but I've been on a number of tangents about how governors blame Donald Trump's an easy person to scapegoat, but this was always on the governors. And they were, for years giving away their state budget, spending irresponsibly so they can get reelected. So they can advance their own ideology and the society that they want to build. And they were neglecting basic core duties of government. But it's 11:02. Let's rock and roll on this thing. We'll do a market update. And then we'll start New Hampshire right after this. Okay. Because they go quick. It's a small state, but I wish I would have been able to answer a lot more questions when we were doing other states. And I want to leave some more time. And there's definitely another segment if we have that time that we could roll into. But for now, I want to be able to do that. And people are always like, why don't you do that first? Well, because we got to keep you wanting more, right? So anyway, it is 11:02 on Monday, April 20th. You are watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. You can follow me on Twitter, guys, at my handle right below at Peoples_Pundit. I'm joined by Tim, the Source Anderson, and follow him on Twitter at TJAnderson1. If you are on Periscope, give us the hearts. Follow the account you're on. Follow both. If you're on Facebook, don't forget to like the Facebook page. Get notified when we go live. Same thing on YouTube. We're trying to meet that milestone. You guys are doing a great job for an account that's built from the bottom up. So again, the ultimate way to support the show is to subscribe to PPD. And you can do that by either going there and following the subscription link or take the short link, which is ppdnews.us/subscribe. ppdnews.us/subscribe. This week, just a real quick word before we go to the market. This week, we're going to get you audio, guys, your files, and I will backdate all of them. Some people are diehard audio, Tim, and they're going to miss out, though, on the graphics, which is why I really wanted to make sure this was more than just a podcast show. Right. We want to show you guys what we're talking about. Tim's talking about the markets. When I'm talking about the voter analysis or polling, or we want to show you those visuals and give you the tools that you need to navigate through this crazy world we are living in. So if you want the audio, I understand that. So we're gonna make that available. If you do, just know that some things you're gonna have to, but you're gonna have to use your imagination because you won't be able to see it. But it's 11:04 now, Tim. Why don't you tell us what's going on with the markets? And when we come back, we'll get into New Hampshire.
The markets are really having a very constructive day. They're well off their lows from the first half hour, and the S&P 500 is down just about 0.5%, trading right around the 28.58. One level to look at very closely on the S&P 500 is 28.63. That's the 50-day moving average. On Friday, the S&P closed above its 50-day moving average for the first time since this sell-off began. So the S&P is down about 0.5%. The Dow is down about 1%. The NASDAQ composite is just slightly green. And oil continues to be the big story of the day. But really, the oil story is getting overhyped a little bit by the media. If you're watching financial media today and you see a Chiron, which is like a headline that I see right now on the network that I happen to be watching, that says oil trades at $10.34, lowest level in 34 years. That's really very much out of context. The current oil contract for May delivery is expiring today. So that is basically the spot price for oil right now for today or tomorrow. That contract really expires tomorrow. By the end of the day today, June will be the front month. The June contract for oil is trading at around $22. So I'll be very curious to see if tomorrow, when they put the current price for crude oil futures on their screen, if they say it's up 100% from the day before. I doubt that they will. They'll then do an explanation that as of tomorrow, if they're doing a story on oil, crude oil will be trading at $22. Right now, they have a little bottom line headline on their screen that says oil's trading at $10.66. It's down. It's under pressure. There's no doubt about it, but it's very much out of context that oil is trading between below $11. There's just no place to store it right now.
You know what we should do? We should get that clip from the press conference, and every time we talk about oil, we should, because it's really all about demand, and we should get that clip from Trump. Where you do know how demand works, supply and demand works, don't you? We should do that because, man, we're doing that.
It'll be interesting to see if anybody asks him today, Mr. President, oil traded at a 34-year low today.
I know. I'm sure they will. You know it, right? But we should get that clip and throw it up there because it's a hoot. All right, let's get into New Hampshire, which lost last week by 1 vote to Nevada, and it was 1 vote. I felt bad. I was actually thinking of clipping Nevada, just and kind of like splintering it off because it was so close. But in the end, let's not rob New Hampshire of its due attention because it is very important. You guys should be able to see it up there. Okay. There's New Hampshire. We're going to look at, of course, individuals as a whole, landlines, mobiles, emails, we're throwing it all in there. Little word about voter propensity score, okay, in New Hampshire. We're just going to look at the map today. We're going to run the analysis, of course, but we're going to look at the map today and not do a voter propensity score because it's key. In the past, there is, typically New Hampshire, it goes like this. There are more Republicans than Democrats. There is a huge number of independents. New Hampshire is one of the swingiest states. It is traditionally, historically, a hater of high taxes, and it swings like crazy. It is nothing for New Hampshire independents to swing 20 points from one side to the other in any given election from the prior. It's nothing for New Hampshire to do that. Over the last few years, really, in the era of Barack Obama, there have been 2 states, 2 battleground states, true battlegrounds that have gone more toward Democrats than Republicans. That was Virginia. When we were doing party affiliation, Virginia, they don't have actual registration. So we can only go by sampling large numbers of voters and asking them to self-identify. And then we look at voting behavior. Virginia went from being almost, and at one point, going back, Tim, to like 2009, Bob McDonald's big victory. Republicans still had a slight edge there and did well enough in Loudoun County. That's the story kind of in New Hampshire, but it is still a battleground because of how white it is. The turnout level is so high, there's not much difference in the voter propensity scores now. So that's why I'm saying today we're not going to do that, because it would not really reflect. There's a pool of voters out there. We're going to cast a large net. We're going to show that. And we're going to do that now. I just want to show you guys what we've checked here. All right. The only thing, as usual, I'm excluding dead people. No jokes, please. And change of address flags for recent movers. All right. So this is the voter roll in New Hampshire broken down. Let's run it. You'll see how big the independent vote is here. All right. Republicans have a slight edge in turnout. They do vote, and they vote like crazy. Interesting point about the primary. And Tim, we did speak about this before, but I want to bring this up again. I'll link this too. In New Hampshire, during incumbent presidential primaries, so you have the incumbent president running for re-election. Traditionally, New Hampshire is the state of defectors. So you will not see large, more than 9 in 10. You just won't see that. Even during Reagan's re-election in 1984, he still got in the 80s as far as a percent of the total votes cast. Donald Trump broke the record for the number of votes received by an incumbent president. I meant to look, Tim. I'd have to look at the final vote count. If I had to make a guess, I'd say he came just shy of Reagan. Reagan had the total percentage. He may not have, by the way. I mean, we were talking about 1/10 of a percentage point. He may have overtaken Reagan. It was about 85.5% or something. Maybe around 85% of the vote. And then behind Reagan was Bill Clinton. That is in the books. I can tell you he did surpass Clinton. So if Trump is not number one, then he is number two. But he got the most votes received. And then behind Clinton was Barack Obama. So you can see already that there is going to be a very strong base for Donald Trump in this state. If you follow me on Twitter, and now if you watch this show, you know that from the standpoint of where Donald Trump should try to expand the map, New Hampshire is definitely one of them. Even though over the last couple of cycles, these independents, which is a huge number, look at that, folks, independents outnumber Republicans and Democrats in New Hampshire by a lot. they're by a lot. So you cannot lose this vote if all base is equal, unless you really have a big base advantage. You can afford to lose it by a little, but you have got to fight this thing to a draw or carry them slightly. And we know from that primary vote that this vote is getting out for Donald Trump. It's going to get out. There's no doubt about that, Tim. No doubt. And then also the other state, which we'll get into this week, is Minnesota. Logistically, demographically, those are the smart plays off that. Those are the states that are at the top of the list for Donald Trump to look to expand the map and to offset whether or not he winds up losing. Let's say he loses Michigan. All right. I'm just throwing out hypotheticals here, folks. If he loses Michigan, but he can hang on to Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, he's going to need a place to offset because, he could lose a state like Arizona or something in a surprise, even though we went over Arizona and my thoughts on that. But here we have the party breakdown. Gender, it's slightly more male than the rest of the country nationally, just slightly though. Household income is a big factor here. It used to be, right, Tim, that the Republicans were known as the party of the rich. It used to be. But now, I would say that is a flip-flop. Republicans are the party of the working class, and Democrats are the party of the very poor on government assistance. It's just a reality. I'm not trying to cast any dispersions. So please save your comments. I deal in generalities because that's what statistics is about. They are the party of the very poor, even though Trump has made huge gains with this group. And they are the party of the very rich. So in between is where the fight happens. Okay. And in case you don't remember, to refresh everybody's memory on to 2016 before we go down, Donald Trump barely lost his state. He barely lost it. And the University of New Hampshire, I think it was, Tim, had Hillary going to win. You know, it was going to win by like 13 points, 11 points. It was something ridiculous. There were very few polls that showed that he had a real chance here. And, us being among them, by the way. And this is one of the states that we were a little bit wrong. We thought that he would sneak it out because he was surging so quickly at the end. Basically, the working class vote was the most and largest undecided vote, and the independent vote, which you saw before, 40%, they went for him big. It just, in the end, among undecided, it just wasn't enough. But where did I scan? Yeah, let me leave ethnicity up here. So he barely lost it, and the polls showed that Kelly Ayotte was going to run, which was the Republican incumbent senator. She won in a landslide in 2010. And like I told you guys, it is not uncommon for independents to swing in huge margins in this state. There is a district out there, Tim, I'm not going to get into it now, but for years, the same two candidates, Republican and Shea Porter, have been fighting over this district. And it was just going back and forth. That is New Hampshire. That is New Hampshire defined. That's how they are over there. It's really an incredible state to watch. Another thing to note about the state and why Trump did so well. George W. Bush won this state in 2000. He lost it in 2004, even though he won re-election. Barack Obama carried it by pretty significant margins both times in 2008 and 2012. They are anti-war. The vast majority of voters in New Hampshire, and this goes across the board, even the national security Republicans are not strong in this state.
Right.
The neoconservative voice is not only not strong, they're almost loath. George W. Bush lost this state in 2004 because of the Iraq War, period. And I mean, that's it. And Kerry was a pretty good candidate for this state, Tim. He was anti-Vietnam War. He was
from Massachusetts. So,
and he was with neighboring. That's right.
Yep.
They have a very long
history.
And
the state has had a lot of migration from the northern Boston suburbs into the Nashua area.
That's so true. I'm glad Tim brought that up. I was going to show you guys that on the map. It is a different state than it was before. It was a different state than when Kelly Ayotte, ran in 2010 and then lost in 2016. And again, it's important to note, I'm not trying to beat on the pollsters here, but it's important to note, go back and look at the polls. This was a state that was a competitive Senate race and a not so competitive presidential race, right, Tim? That's just the reality. They showed Donald Trump was going to perform worse than Kelly Ayotte. A number of states were like that. Ultimately, Trump nearly dragged her across with him, but she lost by several thousand more than he did. He only barely lost his state, barely. All right, so let's look at ethnicity. Big deal. Caucasian is almost 9 in 10. Now, when you poll them, there is a solid, and has been for a while, a solid conservative base, but it is a more moderate state. This is the state that catapulted Donald Trump after he lost Iowa. All right. In Republican primaries, the winner of the Iowa caucus in modern days has got to stop whoever the moderate or perceived more moderate candidate is in New Hampshire, or they'll likely lose the nomination. And that's what happened to Ted Cruz. Donald Trump started in New Hampshire to perform across the board. In Iowa, he lost a very conservative vote. But once we got to New Hampshire, and then definitely by South Carolina, Tim, it was sealed. He won every single county. He won moderate. He won conservative, very conservative, So by that time, but this all started in New Hampshire. It's a more moderate state. Even the Republicans you poll, when you ask them, are you conservative? Are you moderate? Are you liberal? There is a nice chunk that will tell you that they're rather liberal. It's just the way it is, which is why Donald Trump made a good candidate in 2016, Tim. one of the other reasons why he did. And in the end, he's that anti-war thing is just so big here. And his platform, they have a bad opioid problem, or did. It's getting better, but we'll see how that goes with the economy. And that was part of his platform. And then, of course, Donald Trump was a bring the troops home kind of guy. Let's plot this thing, because I know I could see the 11:30 running up on us. Let's plot this thing and map it out. Because what Tim said about the influx, it's not just immigration that's turning some of these states, folks. It's migration as well. So just so you can see the overlap, I'm going to get rid of Democrats here so you can see the overlap. Look, I mean, they're pretty much sitting on top of each other. You can see Democrats in the more rural areas where Republicans tend to do better. This is a big deal. Now, let's get rid of both parties and let's take a look at the independent vote. Oh, well, it's that color. I got to do a different color for this, Tim. Let's just do a purple or something right now. Oh, I guess I have no idea why it's not popping up. Probably by counting or something. But I really wanted to show that to people. Let me work on that because it matters. But what Tim is talking about, let me get down over here. And then, by the way, Tim, it doesn't help that you have a border over here either for a Republican candidate. But Salem is down here, folks. Okay. Yeah. Tim was talking about Nashua, however, and Manchester is the bigger vote share. Trump actually did fairly well for a Republican candidate in Manchester. And here's why. I mean, they overlap each other. This is why I hammer New Hampshire and I hammer Minnesota, because the vote records, the voting preference, I should say, Tim, are really kind of misleading, because the independents swing and could even remain there for 2 straight election cycles before they swing back again. Sometimes it gives the impression that the state isn't that competitive. And this is not the only, and this goes for Democrats too. There are states Republicans continuously win, but Democrats can win them. So it's not just both. And this just so happens to be like when we saw Scott Brown fall just short of beating the incumbent senator in 2014, Republicans began to lose hope. Scott Brown started to talk about the vote that comes in from Massachusetts, from university students. In the end, I don't want to, me guys.
I think there were some documented cases. I think there were some documented cases of that, though.
There are, but you should, you got
whether or not it was enough to swing that election, you just don't know. But
you just don't know. You got to win beyond that margin, Tim. You know what I always say. You got to win beyond the margin of fraud, kind of thing. And I don't like getting bogged down into that because you can see from the numbers here, folks. You can see it. The show is called Inside the Numbers. It's a winnable state. If the Republican candidate lost, it's because of either one or two things or both. So it's a choice between A, B, and C. They didn't get their vote out, which, by the way, Democrats are gaining on Republicans here, Tim. And I think a lot of that is coming from the independent vote, whereas nationally, we see a lot of Democrats moving into the independent column, even though they probably are likely still Democratic voters. But in New Hampshire, we're seeing some of that independent trickle out and go to what may have been, like we were talking about North Carolina last week, what may have been just kind of a natural progression. They just got more liberal. They came to grips with that they're Democrats, and that's it. But going back to why you would lose if you're a Republican, it's because, one, maybe you didn't get your base out compared to Democrats, and then you lost this or couldn't fight it to a draw. There are still enough people here, Tim. There are still, and I'm saying that the unaffiliated vote in the state of New Hampshire is not really, that much more liberal or to the point where a Republican couldn't win it. If they lose it, it's because they lost the argument. It's really that simple. And they're not making their case. This is definitely a winnable state for a candidate like Donald Trump. It is. And he almost proved that in 2016. And the turnout is typically very strong in this state. And when we look at Minnesota, that is the turnout king. That state is the king of high turnout. It's just voter participation in that state is a sight to behold. But New Hampshire also, with the exception of probably, Kelly Ayotte's election, Tim, that turnout was kind of weak. But I'm talking about more recent elections. Turnout has been pretty thorough here. So again, this is where Republicans have had problems. It bleeds into Rockingham too, Tim. Let me show people. So Tim was talking about over here, and you can obviously see that. But it bleeds in other areas of Rockingham. And this people leaving Massachusetts. This is Boston. Let me go down. I don't want to, I'm going to scoot it because I don't want to zoom or not zoom. It's a smaller database. So, it's not going to be like Florida when we go to zoom or pan around. It takes a little bit longer because it's querying the database. It's sending it back and forth. So it wouldn't take as long, but I'd still rather just kind of push down, Tim, than try to zoom in and out. Here's Salem, and Boston's right here. And there have been an influx of people from this area up until here where Tim was talking about before, Nashua, however you say, and then Rockingham. And Hillsborough was once, go back and look at George W. Bush's election. It was once a much closer area, and it's gotten tighter. And then also, too, there aren't, what's the word I'm looking for? The urban-rural divide. You can still see it in New Hampshire. You can. But the rural-urban divide is not as strong as it is in some other states. So you'll see more moderate Republicans, in the southern half of the state, and they vote. Cheshire, they vote. But then you have Democrats up in, Grafton, and they're there. And you just don't see those kinds of of course, it still plays out like that. But what I'm saying is the margins aren't always extreme. And I wish for some reason, I don't know why the unaffiliates aren't popping up, Tim, but I really wanted to show people that. Where are these people? Amazingly, they're like here. That's their concentration, not, just from population, of course. But when you poll the state, the Southeastern Independent is more liberal. No surprise there. From here, county by county, they're more conservative. So that's where you see, if this group of independents does not come out, let's say, and vote at the same rate that the southeastern part of the state, you will see a lopsided margin for a Democrat among independents. And it gives the impression that the state is just not that competitive. And Democrats can win by several points if that happens. But it's not the totality of the picture. So if you had a more even turnout, even keel, then you would see a much tighter race. And Tim, that's in fact what happened in 2016. So what happened in 2016 is Donald Trump needed to do just a little bit better among independents in this area. And when I say a little bit, I mean a little bit, a point, 2 points.
But they knew they were in a whisker of winning that state, because his next to last rally on Monday before Election Day was in New Hampshire, and his last rally was in Michigan.
Yes. And he said, if I remember correctly, the Monday headline was on Tuesday, he told the crowd, on Tuesday, the working class is going to strike back. And what was really smart about Donald Trump's campaign in 2016, which I got to be honest, there was between his election throughout up until the midterms and even some of these specials after and throughout in between, Trump was doing something different. He was going, let's say he'd pick Grafton to go to or something, or maybe over here, In 2016, Donald Trump always went into the belly of the beast. And he knew that there were votes in Manchester, and he didn't cede any ground from anybody. Right, Tim? The only thing that kept him out of Chicago was a riot. You remember that? The only thing that kept him out of Chicago was a riot. He went everywhere looking for votes. And Manchester is a great example of this. And there are other places too. Lansing, Michigan. Where else? Even parts of Oakland, by the way. But I was more specifically Ingham County in Michigan. That's one that comes to mind. What's another one? Maybe parts of Central Florida. But the point I'm trying, even outside of Raleigh-Durham, the Raleigh-Durham area, that's another one. There are large numbers of self-identified Republicans who, before Trump 2016, were completely ignored by the Republican Party. Completely. Nobody held events. Nobody came to see them. Nobody went and shook their hand. If you were a Republican in Michigan, you didn't even bother with Ingham County. You didn't even bother. And I mean, if you guys were watching the Michigan voter analysis, you remember there were tons of votes out there. Tons of them. But unlike Democrats, who are very smart like this, they don't cede ground to anybody. You will never hear, or not never, but there are Democratic candidates who will go into rural Republican strongholds and fight for votes. Whereas Republicans, just the conventional wisdom among the DC political class is to run up that rural vote, Tim, and then somehow try to appeal to the people in the middle. Well, how can you do that if you're not talking to them? Right?
Right.
People don't like being ignored. Donald Trump's genius, I'm telling you, was that he went in these blue areas. And if he just did a whisker better among that independent moderate vote, because he did as best he could, in Republicans and for a first term presidential candidate, he's probably going to do better among Republicans this time in New Hampshire. He's probably going to do better unless there's like some crazy third party, candidate that is tailor made for it, Tim, but they also had other people on the ballot in 2016. All he needed to do
was Gary Johnson on the ballot.
Yeah.
In New Hampshire.
What
percent did he get? I'm wondering, because that state, you would think that state would be one of the states where he would
take some votes.
He probably did better than his national average.
Yeah. I mean, if you go to these, I was one. So Trump got, listen to this. I mean, because I remember it was like less than 3,000 votes. Hillary got 47%, 47.62. Trump got 47.25. It was less than 3,000 votes. Let me go and look, because I do. There was Gary Johnson was on the ballot. I don't remember. He took a lot, Tim. Here we go. 4.2%, Tim. 4.
That's probably better than his national average.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, no, that's about on, that's pretty on par, but Grafton.
4% though, 4%.
Trump did particularly bad in Grafton County, which again, let me show people over here. Are there a lot of Republicans? Yeah, there are. But like I said, this is a state where you just don't see the rural versus urban divide as prevalent. And Grafton does have some high population centers. But Hillary just did about as well as she needed to do, Tim, in like Cheshire and then Stratford. If he would have won the Southeastern Independent, he's not going to win that vote. But if he would have kept it just a little bit closer, then he would have, and he could have. I mean, Merrimack was very close. He almost carried Merrimack. It was for like 3 points separation. And that is the difference. This is an area, though, here is where that is, folks. For those of you who can't see what I'm saying, this is Merrimack. This is what I'm talking about with Donald Trump 2016. He used to go everywhere and talk to everybody. And he really came very close to taking that from Hillary Clinton. It was less than a 3,000 vote margin. If he would have just done marginally better with the Southeastern Republicans, independents, who are going to vote differently than they do even throughout Grafton up into Coos. So, let's look and see if there's any right before we go to the break, which I'm going to do right now, which is like 30 seconds. I'll look at your questions. This is why I wanted to leave more time so I can answer your questions. But right after we go, when I come back, I'm going to scan them while Tim's doing the market update. I'm going to scan them. So if you got questions, if you're on YouTube, Periscope, Facebook Live, just about anywhere. If you ask a question, leave a comment. I will see it. It feeds to me here. Leave a comment there, and I'm going to read them while Tim's giving us the market update, and I'll do my best to answer them. All right. So it is 11:34, just over 11:34 Monday, April 20th. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris, and you can follow me on Twitter at Peoples_Pundit. The map will be back, folks. I am joined by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him on Twitter, folks, at TJ Anderson1. Follow him on Twitter. If you don't, then you follow me, then you see I retweet his market comments on basically every morning. So check out Tim on Twitter. If you're following us, like I just said, if you're on Facebook, on Periscope, leave a comment and ask a question. And when I come back after the market update, I'll do my best. I'll bring the map up and we'll talk about it. We'll talk more about New Hampshire. If you're on Facebook and you don't like People's Pundit Daily, the page, give us a like. That'll notify you when we go live. Periscope, give us those hearts, folks, and follow the account that you're watching on. Follow them both. If streams on mine and streams on PBD's. YouTube viewers, which is growing. If you haven't subscribed to the page, give us that. Go ahead and do that, and then give us a thumbs up. All those metrics help, and we are on a little surge from the ground up. All right, but now I'm going to toss it to Tim. And of course, if you want to support the show, the best way to do that is to subscribe to PBD. It's pbdnews.us/subscribe. pbdnews.us/subscribe. The more you subscribe, the more we can do. That's how we brought you this show. All right, Tim, I'm going to kick it off to you, and I'll be back in the break more with New Hampshire in a few.
Okay, so markets are pretty much where they were the last time we checked. Again, oil is a big headline story today. It's not really down 40% like some of the chyrons on the media are showing. That is the spot price for oil for delivery today, and it's showing extreme declines because there is no storage available basically anywhere on the planet for more oil. Is it weak? Yes, it's weak, but oil is not. This is basically because the May contract expires tomorrow. This is turned into the spot price for oil. And it is trading between $10 and $12 the last few hours because there's just nowhere to go with the oil. For June delivery, oil is still north of 20, somewhere around $22 a barrel. In terms of stocks, the Dow is down 1%. The S&P is down 0.5%. The NASDAQ is pretty much unchanged. The Russell 2000, which was up over 4% on Friday, is just fractionally lower. I think that's a positive sign. Not to see it giving up a good chunk of its gains from Friday. NASDAQ is being helped a lot from stocks that either internet commerce stocks or streaming related stocks like Netflix reporting earnings this week was up at least 4%, and Amazon trading at a new high again today.
All right, that's good stuff. Sorry, I'm over here reading the comments. So Tim, again, for people who weren't, I actually got the Brent oil versus WTI question. You guys should go back and look at Tim's last update on that, because that was pretty thorough. But basically the difference, West Texas, and I mean, Tim, you want to do it again real quick?
Oh, sure. So West Texas, or WTI, is West Texas Intermediate. A lot of times it might just be referred to in financial media as the NYMEX oil contract. That's what is down significantly today. It's down $8, $10.30 last. They're showing it down 43.6%. It's a little misleading. It's more than a little misleading.
Yeah.
It's oil is weak today. Yes, it's down, but it's not down 40%. Now, the reason it is down that much in terms of where the contract is trading, the contract expires tomorrow. By the end of the day today, the June contract will be the front month, meaning anybody that has a type of a spread on her that will sell the current month contract and buy the June contract. The June contract is trading at $22, which means that even though there's nowhere to store oil right now, and if you really had physical oil that you had to sell right now, it would be trading at between $10 and $11. But if you look at where oil is trading for delivery in June, it's around $22. For July, it's around $25. For August, it's around $28. So it's not like oil for delivery in the future is down 40%. It's even more extreme in Canada. There is oil in Canada right now that people would pay you to take the oil away if you had some way to store it or transport it. Again, they're, landlocked up there, especially where oil country is, and they don't have any storage available, and they don't have a functional pipeline.
Yeah, there you go. That's it in a nutshell, folks. Let's get to some questions. 20 minutes for questions is a lot, I mean, a lot, not as much as you may think, because some of these questions that we get, you guys ask some really
they've been
great
good
questions. Yeah. And let's pop the map back up again, just so people have an idea what we're talking about. But okay, I see the one about Access Hollywood, and I definitely want to answer that one. Let's get into, though, and there's another great one. Let's get into the first one about whether or not the voter rolls in New Hampshire are dirty, because there's legal challenges. There's a law that was passed in the era of Trump, and there have been legal challenges to it. It's still not totally clarified just yet. So let's pop this one up first, and I will get back to a lot of great questions from you guys. Does New Hampshire have dirty voter rolls too? And how can we eliminate fraud? Okay. New Hampshire, the question with New Hampshire, and when Republicans have alleged a lot of voter fraud, and then, of course, their attempt to address it has caused Democrats to allege voter suppression, has been this law that you can, we were talking about the students before, and that's where this goes. And Republicans and Governor Chris Sununu signed this bill in July, I think, of 2018. And it was, hold on, I'm going to pop this up. House Bill 1260 something, I think. And what it basically tried to do was clarify who is and who is not a resident. And what Scott Brown was talking about, what Tim and I brought up before, basically is the idea that a student who, if they drove, okay, and they had a New Hampshire license and they registered their car there, for instance, but they live and go to school, or they live in another state, maybe even in Massachusetts, but they have their car registered in New Hampshire. There are also issues with the universities in New Hampshire where these students really shouldn't, or the idea is that they shouldn't be voting. This law tried to clarify who is and who is not a resident and eligible to vote. All right. So part-time residents almost always could vote in New Hampshire if they were domiciled in the state. Okay. That is a legal term. That means they live there more than anywhere else. How do you prove that? Right. I mean, it's just very, very crazy kind of law. And what, they basically just tried to change the definition of that word. And Democrats challenged it legally, and we'll see how this thing really does end up. The ACLU got involved, but that is what Scott Brown is talking about. It's not just the students who are going to school in New Hampshire. He alleged, I think his number was like upwards of 40,000 or something. I mean, it was a big claim, and I'm not sure, like Tim said, I'm not sure we can really back that up, folks. Really.
I would just say that because two of the bordering states, Vermont and Massachusetts, are heavily, heavily Democratic states, where the Democrat candidate, I realize there's a Republican governor right now in Massachusetts, where the Democrat is always going to win, almost always going to win the Senate races, almost always going to win the presidency. I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. And there is documented evidence and cases of people straight up, students particularly, they have a very high seasonal population, Tim. So there are documented cases from the Secretary of State's office of people actually calling and saying, I heard you don't have to live in the state to register to be able to vote. How do I register and how do I vote? I mean, apparently their claims is that happens. It's frequent. All right. And they are the only state in the country prior to this law that did not require someone who is voting to be an actual resident, and certainly not really to prove it. So is the potential there ripe for fraud? I mean, absolutely. I don't know how you could argue that it's not. And Democrats are organized on campuses, Tim. I mean, is anyone really going to argue that they're not organized enough to squeeze out a couple thousand votes? I mean, that really, I mean, we're talking again, and when it matters, even if we're not talking about large scale operations like Scott Brown's 40,000 votes, but I can see absolutely somebody who lives by a college town in a college city. I absolutely can see in a very close presidential election like the one we just had, that making the difference. I don't know how you could really argue otherwise. And then, of course, Democrats, like I said, they challenged it and they basically, argued that it was a voter suppression, and they've had some success. I'm not sure that's resolved even yet, Tim. I'll have to look it up and I will get back to it. I don't want to tell somebody that something that we don't know for sure. I want to say it is, but I'll look and I will bring it up next week because, again, I've really seen that much evidence to the contrary. Another one, there's a couple of them, and then that answers Jeffrey's question, right? Which was, is there any truth to the whole busing thing? Again, there has been documented instances of it. I just don't know that we can really support Scott Brown's allegation. It's more like when you're coming down to a very, very close election, like we had in 2016. Can you muster up a few thousand votes out of a university? If you live by a university, you know you can. Right, Tim? I mean, really. If you live by a university, you know you can. All right. And then another one about the Access Hollywood tape. I think he's talking about Larry Schweikert's book, How Trump Won. And in it, which I was interviewed for that book, did it impact New Hampshire? When we talked about that, the impact of that tape with Larry Schweikert and Joel Pollack of Breitbart News, New Hampshire and Minnesota were two that I particularly identified. And there's a reason for that. One, we can get into Minnesota, but the early vote in Minnesota is so early that we were polling people who wanted their vote back after the impact of that thing died down. And it was not a small amount. And again, a state he lost by like 2 points. Again, a very close election. And since people had been voting and there were votes in the bank already, then absolutely that tape could have done it through that time, or at least had a big impact. And then in a state like New Hampshire, we did actually ask people about the impact of that tape. And those votes that I was just talking about, here, let me pull it. You guys can see the map. Let me bring it back up and show you what I'm talking about. In Merrimack, where Hillary Clinton barely won, there is definitely room for Trump to have done better. But that there are more moderate people here, more likely to be offended, even this whole entire region of the state, more likely to be offended by something like that. And in fact, did tell us, that was something that they just couldn't swallow. So, I mean, when the state, coupled together what we were talking about before, we're talking about less than 3,000 votes. It absolutely could have been, everything. And then the impact of Gary Johnson. I mean, when you have somebody like a Gary Johnson, and I tell you guys all the time, do not jump, do not give in to the desire to simply say, oh, well, Gary Johnson won this much, 4.5%, whatever it is. That could have been to Trump that could have gone to Trump if he wasn't in the race and he would have carried the state. I always tell you guys to resist that. We simply don't know whether that's true or not unless we go back and we find those people, repoll them. We cannot say for sure. But this is a state where you take into consideration all of these factors. They almost all went against Trump. They almost all hurt Trump. And, barring anything else, he probably would have carried the state. I mean, the state was very, very close. And it's not difficult at all, Tim, to see that kind of a swing. There's another one about New England, just in general. And I'm going to find it. I'm going to put it up because this is a great question. And Tim, is somebody who, looks at the economy and how you and I do all the time. All right. New England is like a dying area of the country, right? Economically, they're always lagging when home
It's
sales.
difficult.
They're always lagging with the housing indicators. They're always lagging with the employment indicators. They are, and it used to be the center of the world or the center of the country. And it's not anymore. And there's an argument for Trump to make in this area. And here it is. Is New England a potential place for the GOP to grow? How about Maine or even Rhode Island? Yeah, these are long shots, but what is there to learn from recent trends? Under the era of Trump, the smartest thing that Republicans could have done was to not dismiss Paul Ryanism, the more establishment conservative wing of the party, but they have no chance. Did you see how badly Mitt Romney performed in New Hampshire? They have no chance to win this area of the country. They just don't. They're not big war people. They don't like government. They don't like foreign interventions. They don't like the corporate Republican. Okay. They don't like the big business Republican Party. And other states too, Jimmy. I'd also throw a state like Connecticut into that. Yeah, I mean, we're talking about long shots, but these are areas of the country that have large percentages of white voters who may even identify as moderate or moderately liberal, who used to be in the wing of the Democratic Party that we brought up before. Not anti-China, but China skeptic party, trade skeptic, free trade skeptic party. What Bernie Sanders used to be before he threw away 3 decades of his record. There's a lot there. And then there are other wedge issues. One Tim and I have talked about privately a lot is the transgender issue. Right, Tim? And yes. In Connecticut, how toxic this issue was. And you saw Bob Stefanowski almost won that state in 2018 during a cycle where Republicans got clobbered. Emerson polling, Spencer. His name is Spencer Kimball. I call him Spencer. At Emerson College, he had an enormous amount of the vote in Rhode Island that was Bernie vote going for Donald Trump. And then in the end, it coalesced. But really, it goes back to the old adage, you really cannot win a voter you're ignoring. That's my old adage, by the way. You can't win a game if you're not playing, kind of thing. And these are areas of the country that you would think is being economically depressed, seeing or a general feeling that the best times are behind them. That is something that begins to cross party boundaries. And that's what makes a map change. That's how you shift an electoral map. You see those opportunities and you go after them. Not all these states. Vermont, very liberal. Maine, another one. Democrats outnumber Republicans in Maine. But we have seen, again, 2016 with Donald Trump. I think Susan Collins is going to have a hard time with re-election. But the very first time we ever polled Susan Collins, she was at like a 67% approval rating. They liked her. The Kavanaugh thing, Democrats have used successfully to drive a wedge, but she's also part of the Republican Party that's really trying to straddle the fence in the era of Trump. And you got to be on or you got to be off. You have to pick a side. You cannot really straddle, because if you try, you will lose too much of the Trump vote like Kelly Ayotte did. And then, it doesn't matter what the polls say. The big media polls say come election day, you're going to lose by several thousand votes more. So you can't straddle the fence. You have got to pick a side. In Maine, again, very high percentage of Caucasian white voters. And just so people know, there's a lot of migration. What makes up Maine and what makes them more liberal is that you have a lot of migration there from the old Quebecois, right, Tim? I don't know, the French immigrant that settled over there. They tend to be more liberal socially. Donald Trump is not really an extreme conservative when it comes to social issues. He was the first Republican presidential candidate ever to make a pro-gay comment at a convention where you had Mitt Romney dump Rick Gonell because
Right.
he got flack that Rick was gay.
Right.
And he dumped a highly qualified person. And it was just a totally different era. And they're more socially liberal, but they are absolutely receptive to the message that Trump is talking about. Economic nationalism crosses a huge spectrum. And while you see Democrats make plays for traditionally Republican states, think Arizona, think Georgia, you don't really see Republicans trying to do the same. What Democrats see are demographic trends that favor them. So they're going after those states. While you have Republicans who are ignoring whole states that they have a demographic, or you would think nationally, they have a demographic advantage. It is not true anymore that the white vote for Republicans, the outsized white vote, is solely because of the South. That's simply not true anymore. They've made big gains in the Northeast under Trump. They just have to keep that going. Maine, now they have second choice ranked voting, Tim. So Maine is a heavy lift statewide. With I'm talking about it's going to take more than one election cycle. It's a heavy lift statewide because let's say there's third parties and Trump wins the state. The Democratic candidate gets 48%. Trump gets 49%. Well, guess what? Second choice is going to win, and we saw that with the congressional candidate, 2018. He won the first round. He lost his seat because of ranked choice voting. There was some other great comments I want to go, but what you have anything to add to this, Tim?
There were a couple of there were a couple. Well, with New Hampshire, I would just say, just look at their state motto: "Live free or die." So you would think that is a very, very, very different state than Vermont, and that just from the libertarian bent in their state motto, that I'm sure the Trump campaign is going to put a major effort into that state this year. I think there was a comment from someone or a question from someone on how many strategic oil reserves are there. My understanding is that there is one strategic oil reserve in the country. It's large underground facility in the Texas, Louisiana area. It holds 800 million barrels of oil. And I would think that right now it's pretty full.
That's good.
And the other question would be, what would it take to get we've talked about it numerous times, production. We need people to start driving again, planes to start flying. We need economic activity, industrial activity, all the type of stuff that would use oil for either gasoline or other heating purposes.
You got it. You got any more? We got about 2.5 minutes. I only have one more I want to answer, which I can answer really quickly, or even a comment that I think is dead on, and I wanted to bring it up. He or she. It's not a. It's a username I don't recognize. But is there any other ones you want to answer before because we could do the outro after that?
That's fine.
But,
that's
okay.
Yeah.
So the other one is about Trump not acknowledging college-educated voters do not like him. And I think that is a very important aspect here. Trump, it's important to understand the Electoral College was a landslide, but there are several states where it was bare, few thousand votes, 10,000 Michigan, 40,000 in Pennsylvania, 30,000 in Wisconsin. Those are close elections. And I would absolutely agree with that criticism that I see in the comments. You have got to reach out as a president. You have got to reach out to people who don't like you. And that's just part of your job. But also, if you want to be reelected, there's just simply not enough working class white voters to elect Trump by themselves. And the Trump who gave his Gettysburg Address is a Trump who could win those voters. The Trump who is a more somber and modest Trump can win those voters. I'd like to go on one day a rant about Donald Trump Jr. He could be a rock star. I really think he could be a rock star. But I'd agree. Trump should, forget about the Wiregrass and go to Madison Take a very red state like Alabama. Everybody knows the Wiregrass is going to vote. You could try to gin up those votes and get them up, or you could just go back to winning Madison the way that Mel Brooks wins Madison. I mean, it's that simple. I mean, Mel Brooks is no less conservative. He's
Mo
conservative.
Brooks.
Mo Brooks, yeah. Sorry, I'm thinking of the guy.
Mel Brooks is the comedian.
He's extremely conservative, and he doesn't do any worse in Madison. He does great. That's how he wins, by huge margins. Jeff Sessions, before he turned into the new Jeff Sessions, the old Jeff Sessions, all conservatives knew and loved. He was very conservative. He won that area by huge numbers. That is educated white voters, many of whom want to vote Republican. You have got to acknowledge their concerns and their fears. And that's where I'd end this. Great questions as always, guys. We're going to do Minnesota tomorrow, okay? But right now I'm going to take us out. And everybody, thanks for watching. You guys are great. We miss you over the weekend. Lots of fun. If you are watching on Periscope, give us those likes. Give us, and follow the accounts. Like the page on Facebook, folks. If you haven't, even if you're not a Facebook Live viewer, go ahead and give People's Pundit Daily a like. It will update you. Facebook Live is always crisp, always smooth. I got to throw it out to them. And then YouTube, which I see a lot of viewers on YouTube are moving to YouTube from Periscope. If you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, subscribe. Give us a thumbs up on the video. There's always those nasty little trolls out there with thumbs down it, so give us a thumbs up. All those metrics matter. And of course, the best way to support the show, folks, is by subscribing to PPD, by going to ppdnews.us/subscribe. You can go to People's Pundit Daily and just find it and subscribe. But you can also just go to the short link by ppdnews.us/subscribe. Again, everybody, thank you for watching. We will see you back Tuesday, April 21st, 10 a.m. Eastern time. You are watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am the People's Pundit, Rich Barris. Follow me on Twitter right there at Peoples_Pundit. And I'm joined today and will be tomorrow, as always, by Tim the Source Anderson. Follow him on Twitter at TJ Anderson1. All the best, folks. Thanks for watching, and we will see you tomorrow morning.